Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It's exciting to see the enthusiasm from a global audience for this topic. This has been one of our more popular webinars in terms of registrations. And thank you, everyone, for joining. We're really excited to chat about supply chain decarbonization today. So next slide, please. So in terms of overviewing the session, our goal and the objective of the session is not to just discuss supply chain decarbonization, but actually enhance your ability to do something about it. So to act and drive impact. And can't think of a better way to do that than bringing some leaders in the space to the table to talk about their programs, and Marks and Spencer and Levi Strauss. So thank you to both of those brands for joining. We'll go through some quick introductions. We'll frame up the challenge. Then we're going to hear from Levi Strauss about their LEAP program. Then we'll pass it to Marks and Spencer to talk about ReSpark. And then we'll tie everything together with some unifying themes and best practices. We do hope to have time at the end for a panel Q&A. So in terms of housekeeping, please do feel free to post questions in the chat. We'll do our best to get to those as we go. And if not, we can follow up with you afterwards. Great. Hopefully that sounds like a good plan. So we'll kick off with some introductions. Next slide, please. So my name is David Smith. I'm a senior manager on the Renewable Energy and Carbon Advisory team here at SE Advisory Services, based in the US in Denver. My role is to help companies develop and implement different decarbonization strategies with an increasing focus on structuring supply chain programs. So I'm excited to be your host today. Oliver, over to you.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, pleasure to be here, and thanks everyone for joining. My name's Ollie. I'm based in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. I do a very similar role to Dave. So I've been with Schneider now for 4 years, and I sit within the Renewable Energy Carbon Advisory team too. My focus is also to help companies to address their Scope 2 or Scope 3 emissions via the sourcing of renewable energy. And I'll hand to Jason.
Hello, everyone. Jason Wyckoff, commercial leader for our supply chain renewables work. And in my role, I serve the likes of Levi's and Marks and Spencer and their supply chain partners in the pursuit of Scope 3, Scope 2 decarbonization via renewables. Looking forward to the conversation today.
I'll go next. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much to Schneider Electric for bringing us all together here today for this webinar. My name is Jennifer Dubison. I'm the Senior Director of Global Sustainability for Levi Strauss Co. I lead strategy programs and data, really working across the climate, water, nature nexus. And in that role, we are developing really our path forward and then working to implement those opportunities in our supply chain and then understanding our progress to inform future directions and other program optimizations. So appreciate the opportunity to join you today and share with you about LEAP.
And hi, I'm Kerry-Ann Atwell, so I'm Sustainability Lead at Marks & Spencer, and I look after the manufacturing impacts and chemical impacts of our supply chain and lead our ReSpark program, which is our renewable energy program for our supply chain, and really looking at all aspects of decarbonisation throughout our Tier 1 and Tier 2 of that supply chain. Thanks.
Wonderful. So we can get going here. We wanted to start with an overview of SE Advisory Services. For those of you who are less familiar, we're part of Schneider Electric, who many of you know, headquartered in Paris, large global company, leader in digitization, automation, electrification. SE Advisory Services is the consulting services arm for energy and sustainability within Schneider Electric. We do a lot of different things, help clients in a lot of different ways. You can see some of those on the screen. Today, we're going to be focusing on sustainable supply chain and our advisory practice there, which, as many in the space know, that's going to be enough to keep us busy for 60 minutes, right? It's a particularly complex and challenging space, but also one that we see as ripe for innovation. And in terms of the perspective and the lens in which we view these programs, we thought it'd be helpful for folks to understand some of our experience in the space before we really dive in. We've structured over 20 of these supply chain decarbonization programs across the globe. We also have our own program for Schneider Electric's footprint, the Zero Carbon Project. And when we design and implement these programs, we're really oriented towards impact and action in real emissions reductions. So as evidenced by over 1 terawatt hour of annual renewable electricity procured by suppliers within our programs. So we're excited to bring the insights and the perspective and the experience that we have across these programs to the dialogue today. Okay, so let's frame up the challenge here. Next slide. Many of us are familiar with the iceberg analogy. We're going to use it here because it's a powerful one. With Scope 1 and Scope 2 really is the tip of the corporate emissions iceberg. Scope 1 being emissions from fuels burned on site, and Scope 2 being primarily driven by purchased electricity from your utilities. The lion's share of emissions for most corporations are in Scope 3, which are outside of the operational control of that organization. These are indirect emissions, either upstream or downstream within the value chain. You can see on the right side the different categories of Scope 3 emissions. We're not going to get into the accounting today, although we have a team that would be happy to do that with you. We're going to focus on some of the programs that we've implemented that are driving impact. And it's worth noting as we dive into this, when we talk about supply chain decarbonization, we're really talking about moving the needle on category 1, purchased goods and services, right, from the upstream supply chain. Great. So with that, Ollie, over to you to look at some data.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. So I think it's important to know that data taken from CDP often shows that Scope 3 emissions, on average, accounts for around 75% of a company's total emissions. As you can see on the screen here, that varies across sector. Almost 100%, for example, in the financial services sector, falls into Scope 3, whereas if you look at a cement sector, for example, a large percentage is in Scope 1 and Scope 2. So for companies, by tackling just Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, they can make progress, but cannot drive the scalable impact needed to hit a commitment such as net zero. And today we have Levi's and M&S who are going to be talking about their own programs, and they're operating in the apparel industry, and they're making progress towards Scope 3 decarbonisation. If we look at the apparel sector itself, it's 96% falls into Scope 3 emissions, which is largely due to the intensive processes within their supply chain, such as material production, textile manufacturing and dyeing, things such as logistics and transportation. And we often hear from our clients that the challenge with Scope 3 emissions is that it's difficult to control because it's not your own operations, it's your supply chain. So this does create some challenges for companies, but it also creates a significant opportunity for companies to be able to drive the scalable action on decarbonisation if they can engage their supply chain effectively. Next slide, please. The topic of supply chain decarbonisation has become a key one, as Dave mentioned, over the last few years. Many multinationals recognise it's a big challenge, but also creates quite some opportunity. Across our customer base, we're seeing continued demand for companies like M&S and Levi's to analyse and also directly address their Scope 3 emissions. But when taking a look at data taken from CDP, in 2024, it's estimated that only 15% of companies reporting to CDP had set a specific Scope 3 goal. And for companies that have set their Scope 3 targets, we see a number of benefits or reasons, let's say, as to why they're doing this. Number one is really environmental impact. With Scope 3 making up a large percentage of total emissions for organizations, you can make feasible and manageable emission reduction by tackling Scope 3 directly, and you're able to make the impact needed to drive emission reduction. Number two, financial resilience. So by implementing a Scope 3 decarbonisation strategy, the cost is more likely to be less than the impact of unmitigated climate risk in the next years. Third point is around climate transparency. I know we have a number of sustainability related roles attending today who will recognise that there's an importance for climate transparency in relation to the changes in regulatory requirements and commitments for organisations too. And finally, strategic advantage. We see in an ever-evolving competitive landscape, by making progress on topics such as Scope 3 decarbonisation, organisations enable themselves to have a competitive advantage against their competition. So far, we're really looking at this in the lens of what we describe as a sponsor. And when we say a sponsor, we mean a company like Marks and Spencer's or Levi's that's sponsoring a program with the aim of decarbonising its Scope 3 emissions. This is by engaging with its value chain partners. It's also vital to think about the challenges that the supply partners might face when actually driving these decarbonisation measures. These include topics such as maturity. What we mean by that is potentially the lack of technical or market expertise. And if I zoom in slightly to renewable energy markets, each market varies per option in terms of the renewable energy options available, and they're ever evolving. So what might be true today might not be true in 5 years' time when it comes to renewable energy options. The second point is really around the cost. Whilst we can ask suppliers to do certain initiatives, they don't always have the budget or allocated capex to drive successful decarbonisation. Number three is around the resources. We obviously want and ask their suppliers to drive meaningful action, but we don't always see that these supply partners have access to resources or infrastructure needed to make and drive impact. And finally, compliance. There's ever-evolving regulatory landscape, which does often get in the way in terms of driving impact, which is why it's vital for companies to act as leaders for supporting their value chain partners with the tools and resources to successfully drive impact, which allows me to segue quite nicely into introducing our first speaker today, Jennifer de Bouwsen from Levi Strauss, to discuss in more detail the LEAP program in collaboration with Schneider Electric.
Thanks, Ollie. Appreciate it. So as likely as not a surprise to so many people who are on this call, the majority of our emissions lie in our supply chain, over 98%, and thus setting aligned science-based targets to reduce those greenhouse gas emissions has been critical. So we first set our first SBTI target in 2018, and then in 2024, we updated that target. So we now have a 42% by 2030, really focused on Scope 3 Category 1 tops and bottoms, because that's really what we can control, and a net zero by 2050. Even more important than setting a target has been taking time to really dive deeply into our supply chain to understand the drivers of impact and the levers of change that we needed to activate. And all of those are summarized in our climate transition plan that was released also in 2024 and was really one of the first of the apparel industry to put a document like this out. And what our modeling showed that was in order to reach the 42%, we had 4 primary levers to pull. The first was we needed to accelerate what worked. When we know that our suppliers have set targets and they have plans to help them understand where and how they need to drive process efficiencies and optimizations and machinery efficiencies, they just do better. And so we needed to double down on those efforts. The second lever was about future-proofing our design. This is about material transitions, moving to more preferred and recycled materials. Talk about more, which is around incentivizing renewables, right? How do we transition them away from more carbon intensive fuels like coal and move them into renewable energy? And then lastly, own our own part. There's a lot that we can even do internally, whether that's about how we're managing and processing data, the contracts, our sourcing decisions, all of that. So all of those things came together to help us realize how we could get to the 42% reduction. And so that's what we're actively working on right now. For the purposes of this conversation, we're going to focus on that third lever of incentivizing renewables. We understood that a majority of our emissions from our tops and bottoms were coming from our tier 2 and tier 3 suppliers, and that transitioning to renewable energy really was critically important, but also stood as a barrier. And so we have worked with Schneider Electric to develop a program that we have called LEAP. Next slide. So LEAP is our energy accelerator program for suppliers from education to execution. And we really see it as a bold step that is designed to educate, enable, and unlock procurement of renewable electricity. The goal of the program was to support suppliers to navigate the India, specifically renewable electricity landscape, and to procure best fit options, whether that was on-site solar, to PPAs, group captive, REC purchases, etc. When we were designing this program, and it continues to be incredibly important to us to really meet suppliers where they are on their renewable energy procurement journey. We really wanted this program to offer tailored approaches that met the needs of suppliers and their level of maturity on the topic. Ellis & Co is fully funding this project for our suppliers and this program from education to procurement advisory services for the next 3 years. The participation for suppliers is voluntary, but strongly encouraged, and we can talk about that. And we will be extending this program to other entities in our business, such as our licensees, franchisee partners, our offices, as well as allowing our direct suppliers to extend the program to their suppliers where we often don't have a direct financial relationship. So really trying to reach even deeper into the supply chain. Overall, we feel like the program supports the renewable energy transition, getting at that lever 3 that I talked about, helps us contribute to the reduction of scope 3 emissions. We hope with renewable energy will provide suppliers greater resiliency and also address those barriers to procurement while also staying really true to our value and our company mission, which is to deliver profits through principles. Next slide. But why India? How does the program actually work? We saw India really as a market that had really strong supplier interest. There were enabling policies in place from a regulatory government perspective, favorable economics with proven in-depth advisory services that Schneider had in the market. And we believed that those combined could help us convert interest into signed deals. So it has really made India the ideal launch pad for LEAP, but it will not be where LEAP stays. We fully plan to expand the program to other geographies in the future as other markets become more viable. The program is broken into 3 main phases. The first is on engaging suppliers. We launched the program in September 2025, so it's still pretty new, but the last few months have really focused on inviting suppliers to enroll them in the Schneider's Resource Advisor Plus supply chain, formerly known as Zygo Hub, and have really been focusing our energy and efforts on maximizing participation. The second area of focus is on education. Working with the Schneider Electric team, we have really worked to develop state-specific tailored training on the India regulatory landscape, covering everything from like grid nuances and commercial options that include more general types of training on renewable energy, but also very state-specific considerations, which, as I said, can be very nuanced and can be really tricky to navigate. So depending where a supplier's facilities are, they have access to that specific state procurement opportunities and how to navigate those. All of that with the help to help them become more informed in their development of a business case. And then lastly, the last phase is on execution here. Through LEAP, we are providing to all enrolled suppliers these expert procurement advisory, technical and market assessments. We're working with Schneider on running tenders, assessing those offers, all with the aim to implement the best price solution for suppliers, be that at the individual level or the aggregate level where suppliers come together. Each cycle spans about 12 months and can be repeated over the next 3 years. So we're already working on bringing in the next cohort of suppliers and keep kind of pulling them through this funnel. Next slide. But concretely, what are we hoping suppliers get out of this program? We really want to create a program where suppliers have, no regrets in participating. There's no cost for joining. There's no cost for training. There's no cost for technical and financial feasibility, business and assessments. The vendors only pay when they are working to procure the actual renewable energy. They receive the in-depth training. They receive one-on-one technical support tailored for the state policies that they're operating in. We hope that this program delivers best price solutions because we have a strengthened opportunities in ROI when we bring suppliers together to aggregate their buying power and improve the terms that they can get power under. And we also hope that by offering, again, these state-specific solutions, we can simplify market adoption and market engagement and hopefully accelerate adoption. So really trying to identify those barriers and those pain points and find opportunities to smooth that out for them. Next slide. All this said, and like I said, in full transparency, we've only been at this program for a few months, but I did want to share some kind of early lessons and signals that we're seeing. First, there's been really strong support from our leadership team, which has been fantastic, who really see LEAP as a strategic investment in our India suppliers' capabilities and their resilience. Often I've been hearing it as an industry-changing program, and so we're really excited to have that type of support being shared across the kind of sourcing and procurement organizations specifically, which maybe leads to one of my kind of key first lessons. it's really critical that the program is driven by more than just your sustainability team. I have faith in us, I believe in us, but there's only so much that we can do. So active sponsorship from your sourcing and procurement organization, having them involved in hands-on onboarding to the program has been really essential to build momentum. As I shared earlier, the second big lesson I think for us is like suppliers' procurement maturity really varies, right? There are some who have already even procured renewable energy and this is like something more for them, and others who are, really new to it. So offering a menu of different options where they can come in and be engaged at the level they need to has been really helpful. I think lastly, maybe this is like a bit of empathy, business cases take time. And we know that as a brand, right? It took time to build the business case to bring this program to life. It takes time for suppliers to build their business cases too. And that's why having a long horizon around this program is helpful to make sure that they have the opportunity where we front load the education and we build out that pipeline so that they can maximize the opportunities over 3 years. But having a little patient capital is an important thing when looking at the procuring renewable energy. And then lastly, we're a big believer in pilots here at Levi Strauss, even when approaching big, bold programs like LEAP. We knew that we needed to have an opportunity to unblock some issues before scaling. And so this first cohort has been relatively small, and we're looking to expand that out in future cohorts. But I'm glad we did it because we did, as with everything, right, identify issues, have an opportunity to address those before we roll it out to our broader supply chain in India. So I'm happy to take questions. Feel free to drop them in the chat. I know we've got some time at the end, but otherwise I'll pass it on to my Marks and Spencer colleague.
Hi, that's great. Thanks, Jennifer. It's been really good to understand more about your program and its benefits. We'll go on to the next slide. So at M&S, we have recently launched Respark. So it's a new supply chain and renewable energy program developed in partnership with Schneider Electric. And this initiative is designed to accelerate the adoption of renewable electricity across our global fashion supply chain. And it's a real critical step in delivering on our Plan A commitment. I'll briefly set the scene so the audience can appreciate the context within which we have established this program. At M&S, we've set a science-based target to achieve net zero emissions across our value chain by 2040. And the graph illustrates our progress and the interim 2030 target that we also have in place. That's around 40% reduction in emissions by 2030 across both flag and non-flag targets. And when we start to look at some of the sources of the emissions, we see that over 3/4 of our emissions within our value chain are non-flag, so they're related to energy and industry, and that's the emissions from manufacturing our products. So you can see how important renewable energy will be within our strategy and why we're looking to this solution to really shift the dial on Scope 3 emissions. And on the next slide, we'll take a look at where in the supply chain these emissions occur and how we'll build that picture. So as we focus in on our supply chain tiers, we can see significant contributions in tier 2, which is material production, including dyeing and finishing. So the processes in this tier are energy and water intensive and largely powered by thermal energy. And then there are additional emissions at tier 1, around 10%, which is the finished product or garment production, and that runs mainly on electricity as well. So all of our suppliers are required to complete the Higg Index Facility Environmental Module, or the Higg FEM, every year. And from that Higg FEM data, we can see that grid electricity makes up over 20% of emissions across our suppliers. And further electricity we know is generated on site using fossil fuels like gas and diesel. And even though we hear a lot of suppliers doing really fantastic work and talking about on-site solar and renewables, the data shows us that only a small amount of the electricity used by our suppliers is actually from renewable sources. So this means that renewable energy is a key lever in reducing Scope 3 emissions in the supply chain, and also a great opportunity to work with our suppliers on this new programme. So on the next slide, I'll take you through a little bit about the features of the programme. So at M&S, we're focused on creating benefit and added value for our suppliers through consultation, education, digital tools, and procurement opportunities. So access to renewables is really complex and competitive, and we believe that a deeper understanding of the complex energy market and the opportunities that are available will give M&S and our suppliers the confidence to move forward and make genuine emissions reductions. It's really all about learning and making that progress. That's why we're partnering with Schneider Electric to offer training and advice and then action from a true industry expert organisation. So the ReSpark programme covers 3 key areas. There's market insights into the energy market in our main sourcing regions globally. So that's Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, China and Turkey. So all of those regions are covered by our programme. And it's really about understanding the regulations, the market trends, energy costs, and access to renewables in each of those countries, because it's all very different. There are tailored educational resources that upskill our suppliers, so they're equipped to make decisions about renewable energy. So it starts from the basics to more complex procurement mechanisms. And then there's procurement advice and support when it comes to implementation. So turning that education and insights into action and impact. And really importantly, we're recognizing that our suppliers are all starting from very different points in their renewable energy journeys. So some have already begun sourcing renewables and they're really quite experienced and just want more opportunity, while others are really just exploring their options. And our main aim is to support and empower every supplier, whatever their level of maturity, with the tools, guidance and confidence that they need to take meaningful next steps. So I'm now handing back to Schneider Electric team to discuss more of the best practices and key themes of supply chain decarbonisation.
Yeah, hi everyone. I think this is me, but others on the team here, feel free to jump in. So I'd like to approach the next few minutes together, recognizing the great work we just heard from Levi's and Marks and Spencer, as well as from the lens of lessons we've learned in serving many of our other clients on their Scope 3 ambitions. How those experiences have shaped the way we typically approach the Scope 3 challenge or opportunity, right? It is an opportunity to engage with your customers, with your suppliers, strengthen those relationships beyond GHG emissions. And my hopes are that you'll feel inspired, perhaps even with some specific ideas on how to get started, and you can drive change, whether you're viewing this as a sponsor or as a supplier. So earlier in the call, Ollie covered the 4 challenges in supply chain decarb of maturity, cost, resources, and compliance. I think you can add a 5th column there of the customer or the sponsor leadership, right? As we're seeing with Marks and Spencer and Levi's. And to be more direct about that, I think effective supply chain decarbonization requires clear goals, guidance, and leadership from sponsors. I think Jennifer spoke to it well about the internal view and leadership from like a CSO level or so committed to such a program. And so what we're seeing here on the left, these are surveys that we've done and external firms. I think some of this, frankly, is from Accenture or others, but saying that a large percent of 78% said that C-level executive support is critical in this, right? To enable the folks within the procurement organization, all the way down to category managers, to have that alignment of, hey, this is important. We have to sustain this effort here. And that increases collaboration to carry this effort through. On the right, evidence to suggest that these goals are coming quick, and decarbonization is super important, right? And so, to referencing a doubling of pace or effort, I'm not going to get into specifics of what exactly that means, but as evidence that really getting this going now, sustaining that effort, communicating clear goals, and creating the space and the tools and the resources for suppliers and the sponsors alike to engage on this is super important. And bringing that right expertise and technology, I'll speak about that in a minute, forward is critically important. So next slide, please. So we're looking at this a bit from the sponsor-facing view here. And what we've seen in sort of a framework for approaching supply chain decarbonization that works. We've named these, right? So design, engage, decarbonize. You might hear different versions of this, but effectively all the same. Design is really that internal facing preparation to go out to the supply chain, right? It's aligning on internal stakeholder leadership, who's doing what, the alignment on goals, what's the ask of our suppliers, supplier segmentation, market research, right? We heard a focus on India, right, because of supply base, but also renewable energy opportunity that's evolving there. So really designing the program to then go public, go supplier facing, which is the engage phase. So this is inviting suppliers, sharing with them your ambitions and your goals and your asks, bringing them into a resource where they can access educational content on all sorts of decarbonization levers. We're mostly talking about renewable energy today, but heat efficiency, nature and technology based, carbon offsetting type solutions. It could be anything, right? Depending on what you particularly want to prioritize in your program. Moving into decarbonize, it was said earlier, I think, by my colleague Dave, on the intent here is really to ultimately drive decarbonization, right? To see your suppliers address their scope 2 or your scope 3 emissions. And so this is where suppliers typically need a fair amount of support, right? Most folks are probably still going to be new to something like a virtual power purchase agreement or how to navigate tax credits in the US after the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. And so, bringing that support on those mechanisms specifically and creating opportunity, the formation of VPPA buying cohorts as one way to aggregate purchasing power for suppliers that maybe aren't large enough to go access something like that themselves. So that third column of decarbonize is where we ultimately get to and spend a lot of time in these programs. But you can really think of this, and especially the next slide I'm going to show you, a little bit circular in that, supply chains evolve, suppliers change. They might exit your program, you might bring on new suppliers, right? So if we go to the next slide, to view it a little bit more from the supplier journey in such a program, typically, they're focused on building that capability or maturity. And so starting on the left, working to the right, but again, I'd like you to also think about this as circular as, different suppliers come in and out of a program. But if you think about levels of maturity, there's probably some suppliers in there that have never really considered their GHG footprint or how to do that. Or they might not understand why their scope 2, their greenhouse gas emissions associated from the purchase of electricity and energy, relate to the sponsor's scope 3. So that initial awareness is a key element. Working through getting a deeper understanding of the levers that are possible to decarb, right? Into planning. So, okay, I have a better understanding of my own footprint, the relationship between me and my customers, what might be the best solution here. And so helping to, guide suppliers on that path of understanding which levers to really pull. And then, of course, the action, again, going out, purchasing that renewable energy, signing that PPA, getting the on-site solar. So again, supplier journey, folks are coming in, suppliers are coming in from all different perspectives. And, we've heard about the long-term view on this, right? And so think about that in a bit of a circular fashion too, where, it's ongoing. Next slide, please. So to deliver this, we found that you need a combination of the human element, the subject matter expertise, and the leadership. Internally at your organization, absolutely. If you're, running one of these programs like Levi's and Marks and Spencer, externally, if you bring in folks like us, Schneider Electric, to help with it. And so, this can bring some of that planning, the organization, and then of course the very specific, expertise on renewables or efficiency, whatever the case might be. We found the need for a role of technology in this. If you're going to invite suppliers, where do they go? Where do they go to register, to access the program, right? Gain access to recorded materials or see a schedule of upcoming educational events. So, a place for the supplier, a supplier portal to come in and host them, as well as a sponsor view to see, okay, who of my sponsors have registered? Are they attending education sessions? Are they taking action, right? So when you combine that human element and the technological element, that's where you really get that intersection, and amplify that impact, and can manage a program, right? To measure impact of Scope 3 emissions, drive access out into the suppliers, and get their attention. I am going to move to the next slide, watching the clock here so we can get to some conversation. I've mentioned this briefly a few times, not sure if y'all caught it. I mentioned it through the lens of virtual power purchase agreements. It's one of the mechanisms that really supports this sort of collective or group action. And so there's opportunities for perhaps medium-sized or smaller suppliers that don't have purchasing power to get together, aggregate that purchasing power. In this case, megawatt hours of electricity. You've probably seen some announcements on this from other programs where you have multiple suppliers get together, act as a group, access the market, which of course has some key advantages. The number one being purchasing power, but also the group learning and sharing of best practices and momentum, right? As you work together as a group to go to market. And it can often drive not just access to opportunities, but better pricing and terms too for organizations. So this is one of the ways that you might actually see real decarbonization in these programs. And to that point, my final slide is an example of that. Energize program. It's one that's near and dear to me. I've spent a lot of time working within it. It's a collaboration originally in the pharmaceutical industry. It's now expanded to what I'll call pharma adjacent. So healthcare type organizations and those in that space have all gotten together to engage the shared value chain, the supply chain, in a conversation around renewable energy, encourage renewable energy adoption, right? Driving Scope 3 reductions for all of them. And this program launched back in 2021. And so we've seen we've had that time to see those successes now. And what we're showing here is a summary of two group VPPA efforts that have been successful. And not only going to market and signing those VPPAs, but some of these projects are now actually coming online. You'll see some news coming up here, maybe as early as next week, around some large solar projects in Europe that have come online. It's really exciting. So you can see some of the numbers here, but I'll hone in on a couple in particular. The network of sponsors and suppliers, 12 companies that collaborated to get this deal done. And then the impact, right? Over 800 gigawatt hours of electricity per year. And these are 10-year agreements. So this is a positive impact of greening the grid that's going to go for 10 years. And you can see the impact there annually of over 400,000 metric tons of CO2. So, huge kudos to this group. And hopefully this can serve as both an evidence for validity of this approach, but really to inspire folks. Like, you can do this. You could be in this as a sponsor or as a supplier, and think about that in your own Scope 2 and Scope 3 ambitions that brought you here today. And I think that's it for me.
Thanks, Jason, and thanks all for putting the questions in the chat. Dave's temporarily dropped off the call due to internet issues, so I'm going to take on the Q&As in the chat at the moment. Maybe to kick things off, a question for both Levi's and M&S related to the targets and the percentage of total energy that you're looking to achieve, the question in the chat is, have you set targets for your suppliers regarding the percentage of total energy and or electricity consumption that should come from renewable energy sources? Maybe go to Carrion initially.
Yeah, so I can answer that one. We haven't set specific targets for renewable energy adoptions from our suppliers, but what we have said is that they should be on the same glide path as a science-based target, which will be around 40% reduction in their emissions by 2030. And depending on the mix of energy that they use, it's likely that part of the way that they make that change will be the procurement of renewable energy within that, replacing some of their high emissions energy sources at the moment. So every supplier is different, every factory is different. And we have some internal targets around the kind of progress of this program and where we expect overall energy use to be amongst our suppliers. But it's really up to the supplier to decide and use the best fit for their organisation.
Very, very similar. We have, each of our suppliers needs to set an SBTI aligned target. We also have internal targets related to efficiencies and things of that nature. But we don't have you need to procure this much renewable electricity. Our plan is really, and what we've been doing is, setting a target, deep dive assessments of the facility, which ultimately lead to a plan that then informs the need for renewable energy. And then ultimately they have this path forward with Schneider Electric and the LEAP program that they can take to procure that renewable energy.
Great, thanks, guys. Really useful to get that insight from you both. Another question for you guys. I think it's useful to hear about your own programs, and we've alluded to this already in today's session, but an interesting question around how you built the business case for internal leadership approval to fund the project management, but also any direct or indirect funding for suppliers to actually source renewables at the end of the program. Maybe hand to Jennifer initially on that question.
Sure. As part of our climate transition plan that I mentioned in my remarks, this type of program was already envisioned. So it was part of a broader business case that we were presenting up to our executive leadership and board about what it would take to get to the 42% reduction. And so that business case was kind of solved at a much grander scale. But I think in terms of this particular opportunity, I think the key piece has been local executive leadership. Like when the head of the sourcing market is fully on board, that has helped build the business case with our heads of sourcing who sit in the US. So that's been incredibly helpful. What was the latter part of the question, Ollie?
This is related to kind of the funding, I suppose, for suppliers once we get to the implementation phase, whether you're...
post the execute phase, I think what we're looking to do is work with organizations like Apparel Impact Institute and others to leverage shared, this is where a large proportion of the apparel supply chain is shared. And so this is where we're looking to leverage shared pool funding to help suppliers, if they need that, execute against that renewable procurement. There's also a lot of other fees that are in the process and things we're exploring about how to handle that piece of it.
Great, thanks, Jennifer. Anything additional?
Again, very similar. We worked actually with an external consultant to give us to really shape the strategy to 2030 and understand how we have our existing programs would reach that target and what extra we needed to do. So additional levers like renewable energy being included in the programs. And that's really helped us to ensure that we could create a strong business case to our leadership. At M&S, we always want to work so that we can support suppliers in their implementation and really educate. And all the programs that we do are accompanied by training and education pieces to make sure that we're not asking suppliers to do something that they then don't understand or have more problems with. So this is all about reducing that barrier to conversion to renewable energy.
Great, thanks, Karen. That's really useful. Maybe a question now for Jason related to our wider offer within Schneider Electric and our programs. A question in the chat is related to whether these programs encourage market or location-based purchasing of renewables.
Yeah, and I saw some other questions in there somewhat related around the pending Scope 2 guidance changes coming in 2027. Yeah, it's a good question. So, when you purchase renewable energy, whatever the mechanism might be, on-site solar, off-site power purchase agreements, and you secure those energy attribute certificates as proof of that, it sounds like that author knows and others may know, there's different ways to kind of record the GHG impact of that in, say, a CDP report, Carbon Disclosure Project report, market-based or location-based. The simplest answer is, doing those types of solutions mostly address your market-based reporting, but in some cases can also, affect your location-based. So it's a bit of a deep topic to go into, and just not sure if we can solve for it here, but just to speak to that Scope 2 guidance part coming as well. It's funny, this might be Jason Wyckoff speaking, not necessarily Schneider or Marks and Spencer and Levi's, but we do have to follow that guidance. We do want to make credible claims, but I also personally feel that there's others out there doing some really incredible things, like programs that are covering their supply chains by purchasing EACs themselves to cover their electricity consumption in their supply chain, and that's driving real impact. So I'm not one to necessarily criticize those types of things, but you are smart in these programs to watch that coming guidance. Think about the markets where your suppliers are based. Should that guidance shift, are you doing things that will hold up to it? So taking that country level focus is a wise one. I'm not sure if that answered all the questions, but I don't want to take too much time. So back to Ali.
Thanks, Jason. I appreciate it. I think that answers the question. A question now for Kerry. Of course, Plan A was launched, I think, in 2007. So you've been doing this for some time across Marks and Spencer's business. What advice would you give to companies that are on the call that are maybe earlier on in their Scope 3 decarbonisation journey?
So we have had our Plan A, for many years, and it's evolved over those years to set more ambitious goals. 2021, we set our initial science-based target, and that's really when we started to focus in on supply chain and Scope 3 emissions and decarbonisation in that area. I think brands, when they're really starting to look at their supply chain, can use supplier data to understand the most impactful use of their resources. Identifying those like supply chain hotspots is a really good way to focus the strategy. Understanding who their high volume suppliers are with high emissions and a high proportion of fossil fuel use. That's really where you can start to build that picture of the supply chain and where those emission savings might be. Obviously, this only works if you then have a plan to incorporate primary data into your Scope 3 reporting. And I think I saw another question about that, is how do you actually relate the programme to the emissions and the reductions? And that's really about using that primary data into those calculations.
Great, thank you very much, Karen. Really useful insights. And a question again for Jennifer, I suppose, is your involvement with the Walmart Gigaton program. As a supplier within that program, where you executed an aggregated PPA alongside some other Walmart suppliers, how did that inform your own Scope 3 decarbonisation strategy on your journey here?
Yeah, it's a really good question. For those of you who don't know, Walmart had a similar opportunity that they brought to their suppliers, including us, back in 2022. So we joined the Walmart PPA Gigaton. Then I think this experience, well, frankly, I think it's made us highly empathetic to suppliers who we are asking to go on this journey with us. We are not just talking the talk, but also walking the walk. Our engagement with Walmart and through that VPPA process has helped us better understand the learning curve that goes across the organization, not just within sustainability, but your finance, your treasurer, your legal team, all the folks that need to come on board in order to get a contract like this processed. It takes time to execute that. There's investment required. So it's made us acutely aware of what that journey really looks like. And I think setting both empathetic and realistic expectations for our suppliers.
Great, thanks, Jennifer. I think Dave is back. Dave, do you want to take over the questions?
Yes. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
All right. Sorry, I'm having some Wi-Fi issues. Of course, it happens at this time. But yeah, appreciate the dialogue here. I mean, Jennifer, you touched on this in terms of engaging the procurement function and the category managers, right? The people on the front lines interacting with suppliers, but would love to hear more about the importance of engaging that particular stakeholder group. From Marks and Spencer, Schneider, and Levi Strauss. So maybe Carrie, we could start with you on that one.
Yeah, I think actually engaging with our suppliers, it's our suppliers who really can make the difference in terms of reducing their emissions. So the work that we do in the supply chain and the kind of raising the standards across the supply chain in all areas of environmental sustainability has been really important in reducing emissions and working towards scope 3 reductions, but also reducing general environmental impact in the supply chain as well. And we have kind of wide-ranging programs. This is just a small, well, not small, hopefully in getting a lot bigger, but the renewable energy piece is part of a real patchwork, a jigsaw of programs that we put together that suppliers can take on whichever is the most suitable for them and build that into their long-term plans. And it's action in that area of the supply chain that will really start to reduce emissions.
I think building on what Carrie said, the patchwork of programs, and it makes me, one thing that I think has been really critical is making sure that our executive leadership and sourcing leadership understand where this program plays, right? That like you're creating this picture for them and they're understanding how these pieces come together, because sometimes I think we all do this, we all come, it's like, and here's another program, and it's like, oh, well, what is this one compared to this one, and what is this getting, etc. So really making sure that you're keeping a clear context for them has been important. When we engaged the program, outside of having it part of our broader transition plan, there was conversations directly with the leadership in the India market and the head of, our sourcing teams there, to explain the program to them, what we thought this would deliver, why we wanted to do that, and asking for their sponsorship, a video from them to kick off the program to our suppliers, follow-up messages they would share. So it was really around securing them to champion that program, because they needed to convey that message to the sourcing colleagues on the ground, who can work with and follow up with suppliers as needed. We did dedicated sessions with all of our sourcing leads in the market, so they understood the program. We created back pocket guides, easy follow-up emails, as many of the pain points we're trying to remove for our suppliers, we're trying to do the same thing internally for our sourcing team as well, to make this easy for them. And then highlighting the wins and what we're learning along the way. So that has been key to kind of continuing to foster that relationship, because there will likely be more programs and new things.
Certainly, we've found across programs engaging the sourcing teams is just critical. So that's wonderful insight. Jason, I think this one we could go to you on. When we're engaging suppliers in our different programs, is it mainly for PPAs or energy attribute certificates, or what sort of mechanisms do we look at when we're helping suppliers purchase renewables?
Yeah, good question. Sometimes it's a sponsor hierarchy, right? When we think about the different ways to procure renewable energy, Schneider doesn't, impose that on suppliers or sponsors in these programs, but sometimes there is a sponsor hierarchy that, you've probably seen out there. It's usually looking at, PPAs, perhaps on-site as a priority. And so really we take an approach kind of agnostic to solution, particularly at the beginning. But when we dive in with suppliers and learn their energy footprint, that might answer the questions, right? If you have a small supplier with just a couple thousand megawatt hours, maybe it's across a few offices, they don't own them, they lease them, they don't control the utility, right? What are you going to do? They're going to purchase EACs. If you have 50,000 megawatt hours in Poland, okay, join a VPPA cohort. You can, potentially get positive economics out of it. I have to caveat that, not without risk, right? But that could be a potentially interesting economic perspective with the additionality of helping to get a large new project built. So, pretty agnostic. And typically I say we let the suppliers and the market conditions decide which is best for each supplier. And, Jennifer or Karen, if you want to add to that, your perspective on how you're viewing it, please.
Okay. Well, we're about at time here. We'll do one lightning round question. for each of the panelists. What keeps you up at night when it comes to supply chain decarbonization? And try to keep your answer to 10 seconds or less if you can. I know that's challenging. Carrie, and we'll start with you and then to Jennifer.
Yeah, I can go first. I think it's something I alluded to in my last answer. There's no one silver bullet. There's lots of different programs that are kind of keeping all those plates spinning and making sure that all those programs are making impact.
I would say suppliers have already done a lot. And unfortunately, the climate science and the planet demands more from all of us. And so I think that in combination with just the challenging kind of macro political economic environment that we are operating in makes pursuing additional decarbonization strategies even more tricky right now. And so at the end of the day, there's a business to run, and we're trying to navigate all of that with empathy and our values front and center.
Jason, over to you. What keeps you up at night when it comes to supply chain decarbonization? 10 seconds or less, if you can.
Yeah, supplier motivation. Finding what really resonates with them, whether it's a specific customer request or the business case. Even the most attractive renewable energy solutions take effort to implement. So why are they going to do it? So finding that motivation.
Great. Well, we can advance to the last slide here and wrap up. Thank you again, everyone, for joining. Wonderful to have such an engaged audience. Thank you, Carrie and Jennifer, as well, for joining to share more about your programs. I know it's really impactful for the audience to hear real-life examples from leading companies in the space. In terms of takeaways, here are some things that we've summarized. We hope you have your own list. Certainly, Scope 3 is an important part of the climate equation. We do see renewable electricity as a viable and powerful lever to address Scope 3 emissions. And renewable energy markets, like most markets, are complex. We'd be happy to continue the conversation with those that are interested. You're welcome to scan the QR code there on the right side of the screen. And then as you leave the meeting today, there will be a survey. We're continuously trying to design content that's impactful. So it'll be helpful to hear from you all what you're focusing on and what's next. So with that, thank you again, everybody, and have a wonderful day or evening.